For a man who had mastered the calculated risk, who had outbluffed the Allies at Munich and shattered empires in weeks, his greatest mistake was not a failed offensive. It was a signature on a piece of paper. It was a declaration of war against an enemy that, by treaty, he was not required to fight. An enemy that wasn't yet fully prepared to fight him. Now, let's access the field logs and analyze the true nature of this story. The date is December 10th, 1941. The world map is a sea of German gray. France has fallen. The Luftwaffe has scarred the skies over London, and hundreds of miles inside Russia, the Wehrmacht is freezing at the gates of Moscow. This Eastern Front, this is the war that Adolf Hitler believes will define his 1,000-year Reich, a war of annihilation. Across the Atlantic, the United States is a seething, conflicted industrial giant. It is openly supplying Britain through Lend-Lease. Its destroyers are already fighting an undeclared naval war against German U-boats. But crucially, America is not at war with Germany. Pearl Harbor has just happened, but that was an attack by the Empire of Japan. The Tripartite Pact, the alliance between Germany, Italy, and Japan, was defensive. Hitler was under no obligation to join Japan's war against America. In fact, every strategic impulse should have compelled him to do nothing, to let America focus its fury entirely on the Pacific. President Roosevelt wanted a Germany First strategy, but his own Congress was divided. The America First movement was powerful, demanding vengeance against Japan, not Germany. The situation presented Hitler with a perfect strategic gift. His new enemy's attention was fundamentally split. He could have allowed this division to fester, bogging America down in a two-ocean dilemma. He only needed to remain silent. The choice was his alone. But he did not remain silent. 4 days after Pearl Harbor, on December 11, 1941, Adolf Hitler strode to the podium of the Kroll Opera House in Berlin. He delivered a speech not of careful strategy, but of pure ideological rage. He formally declared war on the United States, a nation he was not bound by treaty to fight. It was an act of political theater that sealed the fate of his empire. To understand this decision, we must dissect the fatal calculations in Hitler's mind. When we analyze his reasoning, we find it is a toxic cocktail. It is a mixture of profound racial arrogance, flawed naval strategy, and a desperate need to seize the initiative. First, and most critically, Hitler held the United States in complete ideological contempt. In his worldview, America was not a focused superpower. It was, as he privately termed it, a mongrel nation. A decadent, racially mixed society, hopelessly weakened by democracy and internal debate. He simply did not believe this unfocused industrial giant could retool its vast civilian economy for total war in time. He was convinced it would take them years, by which time Russia would be crushed and Europe secured. This was his first blunder, mistaking a nation's noisy, democratic debate for fundamental, paralyzing weakness. Second, he listened to his admirals. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, head of the Kriegsmarine, had been pleading for months. He wanted to unleash the U-boat fleet in unrestricted warfare against American shipping. Roosevelt's neutrality patrols were already a de facto, undeclared war in the Atlantic. Hitler reasoned that a formal declaration would finally unshackle his U-boats, allowing them to operate freely and starve Britain into submission before American mobilization could truly begin. He believed the Battle of the Atlantic was a sprint he could win in 1942, not an industrial marathon he was mathematically guaranteed to lose. This, too, was a fatal misreading of industrial reality. Finally, when we look at the third factor, we see pure political hubris. Hitler was a man who craved the initiative. He could not bear the thought of waiting for Roosevelt to eventually declare war on him. He saw the declaration as a grand Wagnerian gesture of Axis solidarity. He would stand by Japan, his new ally, who had just dealt a stunning blow to the Americans. It felt like a moment of strength, but this gesture ignored the single most important document on his desk. The Tripartite Pact was explicit. Germany was only required to aid Japan if Japan was attacked. Japan was the aggressor at Pearl Harbor, giving Hitler the perfect legal and strategic exit. He chose ideology over strategy. He chose grand theater over cold, rational calculation. And, in doing so, he had just personally resolved America's greatest political problem. He united a divided nation and gave his most dangerous potential enemy a single, clear, and righteous target. The effect was instantaneous. In Washington, Hitler's declaration was met not with fear, but with stunned relief. The bitter, divisive political debate over Japan first versus Germany first simply evaporated. Hitler had just ended it for them. The day before, America had two enemies in two oceans. Now it had one, unified, absolute priority: the total destruction of the Third Reich. The Europe First strategy, long championed by Roosevelt and his military chiefs, was immediately locked into place with the full, furious backing of the entire nation. All the vast, terrifying, untapped potential of American industry, which Hitler had so fatally misjudged, was now aimed like a loaded cannon, not at Tokyo, but directly at Berlin. The arsenal awoke. The numbers defy comprehension. Within a single year, American military production surpassed Germany and Japan combined. Hitler had wanted an unrestricted U-boat war. He got one, and it doomed his Kriegsmarine. In 1943 alone, American shipyards, masters of prefabrication, built more shipping tonnage than the U-boats had sunk in the entire war to that point. They were launching Liberty ships, destroyers, and escort carriers so rapidly that the wolf packs were no longer hunters. They became the hunted, drowned by a tide of steel they could not sink fast enough. This was the decisive proof. The mongrel nation Hitler despised began to bury him. He had forced a two-front war upon himself, but not the one he ever imagined. He now faced a war against a Red Army being resupplied by American trucks, trains, and food, while simultaneously facing a strategic bombing campaign in the West fueled by an endless river of American oil and piloted by crews trained under an open sky. Every bomb that shattered a German factory, every Sherman tank that landed in North Africa was a direct, linear consequence of that December 11th speech. He had not seized the initiative. He had personally, irrevocably, and freely chosen his own executioner. The war was now a mathematical equation. It was no longer a question of if Germany would be defeated. It was only a question of when and by whom. Hitler's declaration had done more than just unite America against him. It had officially forged the Grand Alliance into an ironclad reality. Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin were now locked in a common cause, with a single, agreed-upon objective: unconditional surrender. The jaws of steel were set. In the East, the Soviet Union, battered but resilient, became the anvil. It was a front designed to absorb the mass of the German army and bleed it dry, one frozen battle at a time. And this anvil was now being reinforced by the full industrial might of the United States. In the West, the hammer, an Anglo-American force built in the factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh, supplied by the shipyards of Maine and California, and protected by a strategic air force that would systematically dismantle the Reich from the sky. This was the inescapable two-front industrial and military vise that Hitler himself had engineered. There was no wonder weapon that could reverse this new equation. No last-ditch offensive in the Ardennes that could possibly break the tide. There was no political maneuver left that could split the Allies he had unified against himself. The war became a simple, brutal race to the ruins of Berlin. When we analyze this 4-day window in December 1941, we are not looking at a complex, nuanced, strategic blunder. We are witnessing an act of pure, ideological self-destruction. Hitler's greatest weapon had always been his opponent's division, their fear, their hesitation. He had built an empire by exploiting the rifts between his enemies. But in one single speech, driven by racial fury and profound arrogance, he sealed those rifts forever. He took a nation that was angry, divided, and focused on the Pacific, and single-handedly made it his primary and ultimately his final antagonist. He gave his enemies a common cause. He gave them the political will. And most fatally, he gave them the justification to unleash a material power the world had never seen. History is rarely a single moment. It is a chain of decisions, each link forged by the last. But here we see the catastrophic power of a single choice, where hubris severed the chain of strategy. The greatest empires are not conquered from without until they have first rotted from within, undone by the arrogance of their own leaders. As the philosopher Santayana warned, fanaticism consists in redoubling your effort when you have forgotten your aim.